Many cruisers are desperately hoping that cruising will return to how it was. Unfortunately, we're not going to be able to enjoy everything that we may have loved as cruising returns. But it's not all bad news. Some of the more annoying cruising traditions are also being swept away. I'm Gary Bembridge, and in this episode of Tips for Travelers, I explore a bunch of long-established cruise traditions that are ending due to the pandemic, some of which I'm celebrating their demise and think you will too. One tradition being swept aside, at least for a while, is filling ships to overcapacity. If you've wondered why ships can feel so full, here is why. The capacity of cruise ships that you see published in things like brochures or online is based on double occupancy of cabins, so just 2 people in each cabin. However, many ships have sofa beds or pull-up beds that can hold additional passengers in most of their cabins. So ships can and do sail in peak times way over that published capacity, making things pretty crowded on board. For example, Royal Caribbean's Symphony of the Seas has an advertised capacity of just over 5,500 guests, again based on double occupancy, but can take an additional 1,100 passengers on sofa and pull-up beds. That's up to 20% more than that sort of advertised level. MSC Grandiosa, already selling in Europe, has an advertised double capacity of around 4,800, but can sail with 30% more passengers. That's 1,500 more people. The new protocols say ships should sail with up to about 60% of double occupancy capacity. So ships are going to be dramatically less busy. MSC Grandiosa has been sailing at around only 50% full so far. Of course, the business model for cruising is built on sailing with full ships. And if they have to keep sailing with low capacity, we could see fares rise. But meantime, this is a tradition that I'm excited to see set aside. A tradition for many of us was getting to the port as early as we could so we could board the ship as soon as it was ready. We would explore, have lunch, get in early to secure dining, show or spa reservations, settle into our cabin, jump into the pool or hot tubs, and get that rush from kicking off our cruise vacation early. That tradition has been taken out of our control due to the more intensive check-in and screening process. We will be allocated a check-in time staggered across the day. Now, I suspect that higher grade cabins, perhaps high cruise loyalty tier members, will get those prime earlier slots. Now, this change is to ensure physical distancing by guaranteeing there'll be fewer people in the terminal at all times, and of course allowing time to perform any COVID-19 testing. This can take up to 70 minutes per passenger to get results when pierside swab testing is used. So fewer people and staggered time. Also, more time is needed to undergo more intensive face-to-face screening, including discussion of a more detailed health questionnaire. And then finally, once that's all done, for your carry-on bags to be sterilized before you board the ship. So choosing when we get on board is unfortunately a tradition that's disappearing. One to definitely mourn, in my view. The next tradition to be scrapped is one definitely to celebrate. This is the one requiring everyone assembling in person to do the safety muster drill. This tradition is being replaced with a 3-step process. First, you watch the safety briefing video on your cabin TV, and it ends with a unique code that you call into a dedicated line to prove you've seen the whole video. And then thirdly, you have around about 2 hours to go to your designated muster station. You scan your cruise card there, and this proves that you know where to go in the case of an emergency. Maybe one really good tradition changing out of the COVID protocols is this new muster drill approach. I really like this change in cruising traditions. Now, one tradition which is being done away with, which for a while anyway, is dining with strangers or people you've met on the cruise. Now, I suspect there will be equal amounts of people celebrating as mourning this tradition going. Many of the protocols require cruisers to dine with their own household only or travel group that's actually linked through their bookings. The thinking is that drinking and dining is a mask-free activity, and so even with physically distanced tables, guests will be in close proximity and for some time if they dine together. And so lines want to and probably need to minimize close sustained mingling by scrapping this tradition of dining with strangers. Now, while for some of us this may be a good change, you may be one of those who are dismayed, especially if you are a solo traveler. Meeting new people on a cruise by being allocated a table with random strangers is a long established cruise tradition, and many long-lasting, strong friendships, they've been forged out of this. Therefore, I'm pretty sure it's a tradition that is likely to be reinstated as soon as it can, because that's what cruisers want. So on to more meantime. Some of the early leaks on possible protocol changes hinted that the popular buffet restaurants would disappear and be replaced by table service only venues. Passengers generally were up in arms, and the good news for those of you who are fans of the buffet is that this cruise tradition looks to be reinvented, not replaced. Self-service will go, but the buffet will remain basically the same, but with crew members at every station, serving passengers the food. This was already the case pre-COVID on some lines, including Silversea, Oceania, Holland America, so it's not a completely new thing. So while some may mourn the inability to load up your plate, I think most of us will celebrate the survival of that informal buffet dining tradition. One tradition that I think we will all mourn is the ability to do whatever we want to do in a port, be that going on a line excursion, using an independent tour provider, self-exploring, or even just nipping off the ship to do some shopping or hang out in a local bar or a restaurant or whatever. Some of my most memorable ports have been when I've wandered off the ship and kind of stumbled across something totally unexpected, something totally different. But certainly for the immediate future, passengers will only be allowed off the ship on cruise line excursions and have to stay with the group at all times. This is the approach agreed with lines and with ports. It means the line can keep control of who passengers come in contact with and control how that happens by ensuring the different protocols followed by tour providers they sign off on. And of course for the ports, it means that they also have visibility and control over where and how cruisers are kind of interacting with their local population. The removal of the tradition of being free to do whatever you want to do in a port is definitely something to mourn. But hopefully, again, this will change. However, we can celebrate that this approach does certainly mean that cruisers are starting to be welcome again at ports, and at least as guests we can get off and do some exploring. It's not as liberating, it's not as flexible as cruising pre-pandemic, and hopefully that old tradition will be able to return sooner rather than later. Cruise lines have a tradition of charging an enormous amount of money if you need to make use of their medical facilities. The cost for seeing the doctor or nurse has been high, as have associated costs for drugs and other procedures and things like that. Even relatively minor illnesses could leave you with a pretty hefty bill. Medical centers were there for emergencies. Now this tradition is changing, and I think it should be a cause for celebration. Medical provision and all the facilities are being increased, they're being changed as a result of the pandemic. So the lines are going to now be encouraging passengers to access and use the medical team, kind of encouraging guests to contact them with relatively minor symptoms early on, and of course to encourage passengers to contact the team. A wider range of illnesses will now have no charges associated with them when passengers do, particularly around respiratory related things and symptoms, COVID-19 testing, that kind of stuff. The medical center is kind of shifting from a tradition of being a profit center to play more of a kind of a public health role on board, focusing on monitoring and prevention, making accessing medical care easier, having a more proactive public health role on board for them to monitor and prevent illness on board. It's a new tradition, and I think it's definitely a change that we should celebrate. Cruise traditions are changing as cruising reopens and as it finds its way to navigate the world we now live in. Even the changes happening are likely to evolve, they're likely to adapt constantly. But as cruisers, we should not expect cruising to return exactly how it was. But among the changes are some really good moves. So let's celebrate the good ones as much as we mourn those that are going. I have loads more Tips for Travelers episodes that are packed full of cruising tips and advice, so why not enjoy another one right now.